Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're just about to start. We're just waiting for one more of the panelists to join us, and for a few of the attendees to join as well. We should get going in the next minute or two. Thank you to all those who are introducing themselves in the chat. It's lovely to welcome people from all over the world and from all over Britain. I'd also like to thank other Momentum branches who have sent delegates or who are attending this meeting. Thank you very much for joining. Greetings from California this time. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining this Camden Momentum meeting as part of Black History Month. In terms of today's event, we have a wonderful, wonderful panel of speakers, but what's really wonderful about this panel is it's all powerful Black women, and I'm really impressed by the caliber of the panel, and so proud to be here to share this platform with you. In terms of today's event, it is a recorded event, so if you are an attendee at this event, at the moment your video is not shown unless you've joined using a panelist link. So you don't have to worry about whether you will be seen in the video. With your permission, we will continue the recording as people ask questions. So when you come to the question and answer section of this session, you will be allowed to, we will promote you to panelist status. You can unmute yourself and show your video and say hello to everybody else as well. We're very glad to welcome people from all over the world who've joined us to listen to our panelists. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome on behalf of Camden Momentum, somebody who is an amazing inspiration for many of us. Margaret Prescott of Women of Color is the host of syndicated radio shows Sojourner Truth on KPFA. She's the author of Black Women, Bringing It All Back Home, and the founder of the Black Coalition, Fighting Back Serial Murders. She's on the executive board of the Center for the Study of Racism, Social Justice and Health at UCLA. And she's a Barbadian who's giving us a taste with her background of the wonderful, wonderful backdrop. So Margaret, welcome. You have about 15 minutes, and at about 13 minutes, I'll give you a little warning sound if that's helpful. Over to you, Margaret.
That is helpful indeed. And thank you so much, Deepa, and all of the organizers there with Camden and Sam and the entire team. So I thought that the election in the United States is going to be happening in just a few days, right? So of course, it's very much on the minds of a lot of us. Some of you there might have been following the news. And in terms of the topic, making Black Lives Matter campaigners speak, we thought it might be useful to just hone in a little bit about what's at stake, not only for Black people, but for people of color in the United States generally with the election. And just to say that likely all of you know the long history, or may have heard about the long history of the fight for the right to vote in the United States, following slavery, the Reconstruction period, where Black people, at least Black men, did have the right to vote. Some were elected into the Senate and other public office. But of course, then that period of Reconstruction was crushed by the federal government and went into the horrible period that's called Jim Crow, racist period, lynchings, massive lynchings of thousands of people, and more. So it's been an ongoing battle for the right to vote. And in the civil rights era in particular, there were the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were two key pieces of legislation in the United States, both of which right now are being undermined. For example, in 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States gutted a key section of the Voting Rights Act that had offered some protections of Black people for their right to vote. And since that time, at least 36 states across the US have established voter suppression laws. You have an example of a state like Texas. Since 2013, Texas has closed 750 polling stations where people can go to vote. There are a lot more examples I can give of voter suppression, but it is rampant now across the United States. And you also have courts that were basically judges put in place by conservative presidents, so that it means in states like Texas, Indiana, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and others, that even when civil rights groups fight these cases in court, and then they go to the higher court, the Fifth Circuit Court it is called, for that region, then it all gets overturned. So the whole thing is one royal mess. And even right now, there are court cases happening even just a few days before the election. So there's also been a more subtle campaign to discourage young people in particular and Black youth from voting. And, part of that, there's a lot of anger against what is called in the US the political class. And there's also been a certain mixing up of elected officials with movement leaders. And that's what a lot of people, including Black Lives Matter, are saying right now. It's not only a question of going out to vote and then sitting on your hands for the next 4 years, but that frankly, no change, policy-wise or otherwise, happens only in the halls of elected office. Change really happens from the movement of the street. So it really is a question of increasingly learning to use the state against the state, realizing that we could walk and chew gum at the same time. And I also will have to say something also about the divisions and the electorate in the United States. We've seen a change that has happened from 2016. For example, in 2016, Donald Trump carried every sector of the white vote, from non-college educated to college educated to 53% of white women. What has shifted in 2020 is that the white women's vote have abandoned Trump. Still overwhelmingly white men are still hanging in there supporting Trump, not so much the women. This has been a tremendous shift since 2020, and many people are hoping that this will also make a difference in the outcome of the election. But also among people of color, you find, for example, what people refer to as the Latinx or the Latino Hispanic population in the United States. The Black population in the United States, I should say, has historically been the most liberal electorate in the US. Now, among other people of color, focusing here on the Latino population, you look at a state like Florida, for example, where you have a lot of Cuban exiles coming in there, very hostile to anything that has the word socialist attached to it, people coming in from Venezuela, etc. So we see that about 35% of the Latinx or Hispanic vote seems to be going in the direction of Trump. And a lot of people are just trying to figure out all of what that is. But a state like Florida that has an outsized influence in terms of the Electoral College, and those of you who are students out there, you might want to look up the Electoral College, because that's basically where the election in a lot of ways will be decided. Also, Trump has been making a move to try to increase support among Black men. They've pretty much given up on Black women, forget that. But they've enlisted some rappers, Ice Cube and 50 Cent and others who are out there consulting and working with Trump to try to recruit the Black vote. None of us think that they're going to get very, very far about this. But what's at stake with this particular election? The majority of Black people and people of color, Indigenous people, know that everything is at stake, that lives are at stake. because for the first time in the lifetime of a lot of people, not that there haven't been racists or white supremacists in the White House before, there have been, but to have somebody so blatantly, so overt about it and be so whipping it up, practically every day is, is something people see as a great danger. And we see the rise of quote unquote militia groups, Proud Boys and others across the United States that are threatening violence if Donald Trump does not win. So a lot of people realize how much is at stake with this particular election. And I'll have to say that my friends and colleagues in London and other parts of the world are also telling us, although you all don't get to vote for the president of the United States, that vote has a tremendous impact on you, but and even a greater impact perhaps on those of us who live in the global South. I do want to say a bit about Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives Matter as it relates to the election and also to voting. They are different groupings. There is the movement on the street of Black Lives, the movement for Black Lives. That is a multiracial movement. You've likely seen those protests after George Floyd break out in cities and towns and rural areas across the United States. Then there are very specific Black Lives Matter organizations under the umbrella of the Black Lives Matter International. And then there is a broader grouping called the Movement for Black Lives that includes a lot of not only Black Lives Matter, but a number of the more militant Black organizations, a lot of them youth-led. And the Movement for Black Lives in particular, they have had a whole campaign about pulling out the vote and pulling out the Black vote, because they're very Black community oriented, and the Black youth vote in particular. And if you go to the website of the Movement for Black Lives, you'll see some of those efforts and some of that information. But also Black Lives Matter in Southern California in particular, they have been organizing for young people. We are, in California, we could get mail-in ballots. They have been organizing protests of young people literally holding their ballot and taking their ballot to the drop box to drop it in, to encourage other young Black people to vote as well. So there's been much more involvement in this election cycle with the Black Lives Matter movement than even in the previous election cycle. But just to say that the whole Trump era, so to speak, and really forcing even more the dehumanization of the lives of those of us who are people of color. And you can see the examples from the kidnapping of children at the border, the southern border, the Mexican border in particular, the comments that were made on that. But not only that, the history of the taking of Black children, but also other children of color and poor white children by child welfare, children being taken and put up for adoption or being put up for foster care, not because of abuse, but because their families are impoverished, their families are poor. And that is a huge problem in the United States. And when the children were being taken at the border, there began to be some discussion about the overlap, because some of those children also ended up in child welfare. But just to say, I'm going through a lot of things very, very quickly, just to say that this is really the continuum that has happened about the devaluation of the lives of some of us. And we have to keep in mind too, that we're talking about defunding the police and the demands for defunding the police, and I'll say a bit more about that, remembering that the police, law enforcement in the United States began as slave catchers. That's who they were. And people are still calling them slave catchers. And when you look at the people who are being killed by the police, for example, in 2019, there were over 1,000 people who were killed by the police. Now, 24% of those killed were Black, while Black people are only 13% of the population in the United States. And in fact, in 2019, there were only 27 days in the whole year that the police didn't kill anybody. And it's happening just this past weekend. I was talking to somebody on the phone yesterday, somebody she knew was shot and killed by the police in a car, unarmed, and his girlfriend injured. Latinos, who are 16.5 of those killed by the police, but only 17.8% of the population. And also, Black Lives Matter, and in particular Black Lives Matter, but other groups working on incarceration and policing have also sent off the alarms about the rising criminalization of the police in the United States, and a lot of the training of those police by Israel, for example. Some of the methods they use against the Palestinian people then get integrated into what's happening in policing in the United States. And you see policing in the United States now looking like a military force, coming in with tanks and battle fatigues. And indeed, in the recent protests, Donald Trump called out various security forces that remain unnamed, but there were official forces tied with the federal government, and he's threatening to pull out these forces again following the election. You may have heard about some of them in New York City, but also Portland, Oregon in particular, an unmarked car snatching people off of the street, and the kind of thing that people generally have said that they're not used to happening in the United States. So I just want to also give a couple of quick examples of this devaluation of Black lives and what that might mean for Black people everywhere. One is the dehumanization that happened with Black single mothers, and the attack that happened on Black single mothers, claiming that Black single mothers were, quote unquote, destroying the Black family. Because they weren't in traditional marriages. And there's quite a famous guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan who wrote about that. 2 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So that's one example. And the attack then that happened against those mothers, against welfare mothers, definitely tied to that. Another is what happened with the serial murders of Black women in South LA. That is an egregious case because there are at least 200 Black women who are dead or missing as a result of the activities of a series of serial murders. And the police, law enforcement, refer to these women as no humans involved. And that's part of the work that I've been involved in, is trying to get some justice for these women. But also to say this NHI, they were called, and there was another term called an 1199, the N-word. An 1199 is what the term that's used when a dead animal is found. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of mindset of folks. The other piece, because I do have to wrap up quickly, that I want to mention is the environmental racism that's happening. I don't know if you all have had a discussion there about environmental racism, but when you look at the United States and you look at the most polluted areas, you see indigenous areas, you see frontline communities, as they're called, in inner cities, et cetera, where you find a concentration of pollutants. And also racism is being discussed now as a public health crisis, okay? It's beyond, just the ideas. The studies are now being done on not only the physical, but the emotional impact of racism in and of itself. But the point being that that we're making to the Black Lives Matter movement here and everywhere is that looking at the struggles of Black people, for example, in Haiti, who are up against everything, who are being slaughtered by a government that's backed by the United States, that as a Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, but also in the UK, that we have to pay attention to what's going on in Haiti, the first Black republic, right? And if Black lives in Haiti don't matter, they're not gonna matter anywhere. And we see Black people rising up in Nigeria. I understand you'll be getting a report on that, a little bit different, but also other people of color. In Thailand, a huge movement going on in Thailand. In Peru, a huge movement going on in Thailand. In Bolivia, they managed now to get rid of that right-wing government following the coup that happened there. And so you see people rising up everywhere. And the fact of the matter is that all of these movements, we can't afford to separate them off. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to talk about the Poor People's Campaign because that's very much related to this topic.
Margaret,
But we
please
know
go
that
ahead.
if Black lives don't matter in any of these places, none of us not only will survive as human beings, but the planet itself will be in jeopardy. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And please, if you wanted to conclude with your thoughts about the Poor People's Campaign, we'd be keen to hear that. So please feel free to finish those thoughts.
Perhaps in the discussion that can come up a bit. I'd like to give everybody to have their time. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd now like to invite Sheridan Mumuni from West London Black Lives Matter. Sheridan, thank you very much for joining us. Sheridan is a BLM activist organizing demonstrations in different boroughs in London. She's also the women's officer of Brentford and Isleworth CLP. So thank you for joining us, Sheridan, and over to you. You might need to move your camera slightly downwards so we can see you.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I've got my tab left to hold it. Thank you very much for having me, much appreciated. So my name is Sheridan Mumuni. I've actually been a member of the Labour Party now for 5.5 years. And I'm currently, as you said, the Women's Officer. I am also the Treasurer as well for Brentford and Isleworth Constituency Labour Party. And I am also a member of the West London Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm also a mentor for an organisation called 100 Black Men of London. Basically, the reason why it all came about was I'd met Anil Patel, who's obviously here as well, and he was basically the one that actually started up the whole West London Black Lives Matter, and he started it in Chiswick, which is literally just down the road from where I live. And then he decided that he wanted to do one in Brentford, which is actually where I live. So what I did, I actually got in contact with him, and I thought, oh, maybe he'd like some help. And he came up with the idea and said, well, seeing as you live in Brentford, you can do Brentford and he'll do Chiswick. And then that's how it came about, really. It was a great turnout. I had about 90 people turn up. It was pouring down with rain. So we took the kneel down for George Floyd for the 9 minutes, and it was just pouring down with rain on our heads. But what was astonishing was that in Brentford, the amount of verbal abuse I got, written abuse on social media was astonishing. I was told that I should be barred from every pub in Brentford, that, this is not to do with us, it's to do with America. Why am I bringing this issue to Brentford? I got somebody that put on Twitter, they put it on my timeline. It's basically a room, and it's 2 inches filled with blood. And somebody had said, at Sheridan Mumuni, this is what it looks like when you kill a nigger. And I replied back, why do you say that? Because you brought this crisis and drama to Brentford. And it's like the same thing that's going on over there. We're also guilty ourselves of it over here. There's racism here. And I was told that I'm racist, I'm this, I'm that. And I just couldn't believe it. And obviously I reported it to the police. The police didn't do anything about it. But it didn't stop me. I decided to do another demonstration, and I did one in Feltham. And Feltham is particularly racist, if you know Feltham. It's actually quite disgustingly racist. I had to have a police escort with me when we did the march. And we had a few people sort of making comments, shouting, driving by, making comments in the car. But again, with that too, on social media, within 24 hours, there was 132 negative comments. Who does this black witch think she is, bringing this to Feltham? It was just absolutely terrible. And I just think that's just a small part of West London, and we still need educating. People here are really, really ignorant. And those 2 areas are actually in the borough of Hounslow. And it's one of the things with the Black Lives Matter that I really, really, really want to concentrate on, because I do feel in that borough, people need educating around black people. They've introduced the stop and search in areas like Osterley and Brentford and Chiswick, and it's with young black boys. And it's the same, the same boys just going to the shop, and they're saying to the police officer, my mum's sending me to shop to get something. And it's like, you stop the same guy for the 3rd time in a row in the same week. It's absolutely ridiculous. even in the borough of Hounslow, lack of jobs. I myself am still looking for a job, not having much luck. It's like I'm applying for the same job that half the country are applying for. But obviously that's because of COVID as well. But it's just absolutely ridiculous. My name probably doesn't really help because it's Sheridine with me. So it's one of those things, yeah. But I mean, we really, really, really need educating over here. And it's sometimes you feel like you're just banging your head against a brick wall, because at the same time you're doing it because you're trying to help people, you're trying to fit into the system, but at the same time it's like you're being told that you're damaging Brentford, you know, you're bringing drama here. And it's almost like even when I'm walking down the street, I know people actually recognize me because of the demonstration as well. Whether that's a good thing, who knows. But I'm very passionate about change, and I do think it's important that we educate our children in today's society, because it teaches them not to be ignorant, and also it helps them also how to grow as well. Yes, that's about it really.
Thank you for
short and sweet.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Sheridine. And I can see from the chat that we're all horrified that
I didn't mean to scare anybody.
No, I mean, it's not about scaring people. I think it's more that we all send our solidarity, and we're sorry you had to experience this. It certainly shouldn't be something that we allow. Thanks again for sharing that. I'd now like to invite Asma Begum, if I may, to speak. Asma is from Soul Sisters. She's the founder of a group of survivors of domestic violence and an advocate and organizer with mothers and vulnerable women of different backgrounds. We're very grateful to have you here. Asma, over to you.
Hello everyone, thank you. And to the speakers, you know, definitely well done, very brave and really informative. Thank you for having me. So yes, I'm Asma. I'm from Greater Manchester, UK, and I am the founder of Soul Sisters Empowering People. I'm also a survivor myself of domestic abuse. So one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is to use my experience of what went through when I fled as well, what happened. So I want to help other women who are going through this experience. And when I'm someone basically that is who holds a law and sociology degree, you know, has a corporate background, and yet when I fled, I found it very difficult to get help from the professional field, from police, GP. I found myself constantly banging my head against the wall, trying to ask for help. No one was listening. It's like you have a label on you once you're a victim. And therefore, I came at some point, I'd seen something on the TV, and I asked for Women Against Rape to help me. And since them helping me with my case, I managed to win. I had 10 allegations in the family court because my perpetrator was trying to get contact with my little boy. And I managed to win the case, and he had no contact with my son. And that was with the help of Women Against Rape. So what I'm trying to say is that domestic abuse does not, it can happen to anyone. So if it could happen to someone like me, I thought, right, well, what I've learned in the time that I went through the fight is that I need to help now all these other women with this knowledge that I've learned. So, you know, there's a cultural background to it as well that I've learned that I didn't know about before. So I wanted to help with all the information. What's the point of me having all this information and going through the struggles and mental health issues, because all these victims go through that day in and day out. So I help. So I started this a year ago. I started public speaking to raise what awareness domestic abuse is, how you can help someone, you know, what the right things are to say and what not to, because the usual question the victims get is, why couldn't you just leave? And straight away people become defensive. So my group so I started public speaking. Then I started basically building my confidence and built Soul Sister group, created a group called Soul Sister, and it's helping women and children that have come from domestic abuse. So if they're victims, if they're survivors, if they suffer with sexual abuse, and basically it's trying to get them to move on with their lives, to become independent, and from a fearful life to become fearless, and you know, to know that they can reach goals in their lives, that they don't have to stay back and, you know, think that they can't move on because the perpetrators obviously make them feel like you can't do anything with your life. So Soul Sisters is about empowering these people. I offer, and I've got a group of people now, it's been a year, offer support and mentorship via coaching and developing using the Way Forward program. We offer one-to-one sessions and group sessions. I hold focus groups, do training, do one-to-one mentoring, provide advocacy, signposting of key information and other organizations, provide support and understanding to survivors, children and families, help people of domestic abuse to break the chain of abuse going forward, work with other agencies to ensure the best outcome for all. So it's not about me taking, it's about working in partnership with other organizations, collaborating with other organizations. Now, Women Against Rape have been brilliant in helping me to work with cases. I've had women of color, many women of color, because I do a lot of live videos on social media. So I've had many women of color come forward to me asking me for help. And I've been some of them, a lot of them have got cases in the family court and they have they don't know what to do. I mean, one of them basically, she had been telling them that she was raped by her perpetrator. However, because she's a woman of color, she has a language barrier, and she's not very good with her, reading and writing skills. Basically, they didn't listen to her. The lawyers didn't follow any instructions, were making her pay fees that she couldn't afford, didn't listen to her, and in court, the perpetrator got contact with all 4 children. And when she went to report this to the police about the rape, because she didn't do it before, they said, well, why didn't you tell us this before? You're just telling us. Even her solicitor was saying, why are you bringing this up now that you were raped? And, why didn't you tell us before? It's ridiculous. Because what I said to them was, victims, she came to help me after 6 months of going through all this torture, and her kids were taken off and she was distraught. And I talked to the solicitor on her behalf as a Mackenzie's friend and explained, look, victims are so fearful, they don't even know they're going through abuse, and they are so fearful of the perpetrator that they will not say they are fearful that the perpetrator will do something to them or the children. That's why she didn't come forward. But now, with them taking the children off her, this is why she's speaking up. You should have been asking her, why have you told us before? You should be helping her. So that solicitor was making her pay thousands in fees, and was not listening to her. As soon as she come to us and I got help with Women Against Rape, we were able to give her a supporting letter to get legal aid. We've told her to stop using that solicitor. We signposted her to a new solicitor who is really listening to what we have to say for her. When she had her remote hearing, in the UK at the minute, obviously with the lockdown, there's remote hearings happening. Again, she was not explained. She was just told the day before by the solicitor, you've got a remote hearing. Not told about what's going to happen, was not given any documents to look at, wasn't asked what you would like to say. The solicitor was going ahead doing her own thing until I rang the solicitor. The solicitor didn't sound very happy. But as soon as you have that backup from a third party, they know they've got to do their job. I've had another woman of colour who came to help.
Asma.
Yes. Another woman of colour who came to help from me, who was basically, a child was taken off her and was put into foster care. And basically when she tried to tell the court and her social worker and family worker that the child is from a Muslim background and was put in a non-Muslim family, foster family, that, he's not being looked after, he's being neglected, his teeth are not brushed, he's being put in his own room. What the court said and the solicitor said is that she is undermining them, she's being hostile. So they took her second child off her as well. So these courts they just don't want to listen. If you're a woman of color, they just have this label on you that you're a victim and you are a victim. And, that's not the right thing to do. So we need to speak up. Speaking is power. The woman that, lost her 4 children, she keeps saying to me now, I'm going to keep speaking, Asma. I'm not going to shut up anymore. I am going to keep speaking. And if you keep speaking, someone there will listen, will understand, and will help you. And, honestly, I could just keep going on, really. But yeah, There's also parent alienation happening with these women of color. The perpetrators are saying that these mothers are, becoming crazy and that they need to be taken away from the children. That all this stuff is happening, and the mothers are being separated from their children. So yeah, that's me. Sorry, Deepa.
No, thank you very much, Asma. And it's just that we've got quite a few speakers today. So what I'm hoping to do is come back to some of the very important points you made in the Q&A. So thanks very much for your contribution, and thank you for the work that you do. Our next speaker we intended to host Cameron Joshi for the next session, but Cameron is unwell. Our good wishes to him for a smooth recovery. And I'd now like to invite Huda Mori. Huda is with Palestine Action. She's Palestinian Iraqi, am I right, Huda? And she's also a BDS activist and a researcher at Corporate Watch. I've followed Corporate Watch for a while, and they do some absolutely fantastic work. And it's a real pleasure to have you here, Huda. And over to you. You have about 7 minutes.
Yeah, I won't
thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel today, and for the other speakers that have just spoken before me. And I'm really pleased to be sharing this panel with these incredibly powerful women talking about standing up against all forms of oppression, including racism and abuse, where it takes place. So that just brings me on to what I would like to focus on today, which is the launch of Palestine Action, a new direct action group launched in the UK for just over 3 months. But I'd like to begin by just talking about UK complicity with Israeli apartheid overall, and through my own family history. So in 1917 is when the UK issued the Balfour Declaration, which was essentially a statement which allowed for the colonization of Palestine and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population from their homeland. And they said it was in order to make a Jewish homeland in Palestine, where 97% of the population at the time were not Jewish. So this meant that they would have to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population from their homes. Shortly after this, in the early 1920s, my own great-grandfather was shot and killed by a British soldier at the time, leaving my great-grandma a single mother in the early 1920s in historic Palestine, which you can imagine is never easy at any time, and especially not then. And then we saw in 1948, the Zionist militia, backed by Western governments, with the aid of British colonization, and so forth, went into Palestine and ethnically cleansed and forced out over 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and destroyed over 450 towns and villages. And this system of ethnic cleansing, of massacring and forcing out Palestinians from their homes continues to this day. And it was in 1967, shortly after that, that my own father, when he was a child, was hiding under the table in his own home, which his parents had owned and his grandparents before that had owned as well. And he was hiding under the table while the Israeli military was shooting with bullets into their house. And the only way that they could get out was to crawl through the back of their house with just the clothes that they had on their backs, and had to hide in caves for 3 days without any humanitarian aid. And my father eventually made his way alongside his family to Kuwait and then Iraq, met my mother, etc. And I kind of came into the picture through that. And you speak to any Palestinian, and the story will always root back to the occupation, to Israel's apartheid regime, if they are not in Palestine and suffering under apartheid today. And we've seen Gaza that they've been suffering under a blockade for over a decade, a brutal blockade, and have been bombed several times during this time. In 2009, in 2012, and in 2014. And in March 2018, Palestinians in Gaza began to march to the fence, which has entrapped them under this brutal siege for over a decade, to demand their rights to freedom, to demand their rights to return to their homes, of which they were forced out in 1948 and 1967 and from other parts of Palestine, and to demand their right to life, their basic human rights. And Israel met these protesters by sniping them down and massacring them at sight for simply demanding their rights and going to protest for their rights. And Palestinians keep going again and again, because for them, they have nothing to lose. They take their lives. Their lives have already been taken by this brutal system of embedded structural racism, which isn't just happening. It's not happening in isolation. It's happening because Western governments support it. Often when Israel would shoot these protesters, they killed over 250 unarmed protesters, but they injured over 35,000. And they would deliberately use bullets, like sniper bullets, which when aimed at someone's limb will explode. And the only way to treat the injury is for the leg to be amputated. And this is a method that they would routinely use to deliberately disable Palestinians, especially young Palestinians. On the first day they did this of the protest, they did this to a young Palestinian footballer, 20 years old, and his leg had to be amputated and his life basically and his future taken away from him for going to protest for his human rights. And these bullets and these snipers are made by companies like Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest private arms company. And they actually market their weapons as battle tested, because when they are killing Palestinians in Gaza who are stuck under a brutal blockade, where over 80% of the population are refugees, majority of them children, not only are they killing over 500 Palestinian children in 50 days in 2014 and massacring them as part of their system of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, but it's also that they can profit and market these weapons as battle tested. And these weapons are being made and the components are being made in the UK. They're being made in the US. They actually have 10 sites all across the UK, including 4 factories, several offices, and they also operate at the Royal Air Force sites. And you can imagine just how a country which has been complicit in this for over 100 years, and we've been campaigning with petitions, letters, divestment campaigns for decades, for years, and we continue to be ignored. We continue to have our voices silenced, and instead of actually being heard, we're repressed for speaking out on Palestinian human rights. We're silenced and we're censored, and we've grown tired of this. So we've started a new direct action group where we go and we take the power into our own hands and we say enough is enough. We're not going to appeal anymore to a government which has been the ones who've been colonizing Palestine, or the politicians who've known about this for ages and they choose to ignore it because it's easier for them to ignore it. It's more profitable for them to ignore it. And we've been trying the same tactics and it's not working. And it gets to a point where we have to, especially as people who are in Western countries like the UK, who do have a level of privilege that comes with that to stand against racism and to stand against all systems of oppression means we have to stop these sites where and when they're being made, which means putting ourselves on the line, which means in the case of Palestine Action, throwing red paint across their offices to symbolize the bloodshed by these companies. And just stay
1 minute, Huda.
Okay. And so I would urge on people, in the UK to join us. We've taken action against them over 15 times, occupied the rooftop of one of their factories for 3 days, and poured red paint to symbolize and damage their buildings, because we're tired and we're not going to appeal anymore. And we have to take the power into our own hands and shut these sites down ourselves. And we call on everyone to join us, because if we have so much power. And with our privilege comes power, and that means we have to stand up and put ourselves on the line and say we're just gonna do this ourselves. Enough is enough. We're tired of being ignored, and we'll take the power into our own hands until all complicity with Israeli apartheid and oppression across the world, in the UK, in the US, ends for good. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. Very passionate contribution, and thank you very much for sharing the work that you are doing. Our next speaker is has over 75 years of activism under her belt. I understand she was first an activist at the age of 15. She's now 90. And I'm so glad to welcome Selma James, our next speaker. Selma was a demonstration participant and a witness in the Mangrove 9 trial. She's an anti-racist activist and author of Sex, Race and Class, The Perspective of Winning. Her forthcoming book is Our Time Is Now, Sex, Race and Class, Caring for People and Planet, which is out soon. Selma, over to you. We're so glad that you were able to join us, and thank you very much for being here. I'm just going to unmute you, Selma. Just bear with me a second. The message should come up on your screen. Okay, does it come up with a little message asking you to unmute? Just have to say yes. There's a little red button across the bottom of your screen, which looks like a microphone. If you bear with us. I think Selma's clicked the leave button by mistake. So hopefully she'll rejoin in a second. Sam, are you able to help Selma rejoin? Or are you nowhere near her?
Sorry, I'm not there. I'll do what I can.
Okay, while you're doing that, if I may, I'll invite our next speaker, Ada Osama, who's reporting on the uprising in Nigeria from the All African Women's Group. Ada, if you're happy to speak, while Selma gets reconnected, I believe you're just going to give us a short update on what's happening in Nigeria. Is it okay if we go to you next? I'm going to ask you to unmute, and hopefully the sign should come up on your screen. Ada, can you? There we are. Great.
Thank you so much.
Please, you can start now. I'm just going to pin your video so everybody can see you. There you go. Over to you, Ada.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for having me here. I am Osama from All Africa Women Group, a self-help group of women not only from Africa, but also Latin America, Caribbean, and Asian countries. We have been attending protests in London to support our people in Nigeria. We are part of Global Black Life Global. We are part of the Global Black Lives Matter movement. We are demanding change in our Africa country. Police violence, corruption, and poverty in Africa has been going on for a very long time. Continue with the slavery where their colonial master left us. The people who are supposed to protect use their uniform to kill us, to kill our children and youth, even the women. Even the women. Police and security forces commit terrible crime. Women and children suffer most, including rape and other crime. It got even worse during COVID-19. Our Black life does not seem to matter in our own country. We need food. People are dying for hungers in Africa. No electricity. We need food, we need electricity, we need water, we need hospital, good hospital and schools, disability allowance, job for the youth, and money for mothers so that we can take care of our children. We support the demand of this protest going on. End SARS now. End the police killing of our youth. End the rape, torture, and kidnapping. End bribery and corruption. Buhari must go. Mass protest to end SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Unit started this October when a video showed a SARS officer shooting a man. The person who video was arrested and accused of sharing false news. Everybody is coming out. Many youth, young people, mothers, elderly people, disabled people even started their own protest today, calling for their rights and fun to live on. They are be forgotten in the society and misled and mistreated very badly. Journalists covering the city, but people are out in countryside and villages. Even farmers, they are protesting as well. Women are at the front line organizing food, water for the protest, doing security, publicity, medical, and legal aid to make this protest possible. News is spread in 7 African languages. There have been support protests in Ghana, Egypt, South Africa, the US, and UK. As we are saying this, the British, they are not innocent. British is not innocent of this. British carve up Nigeria for the benefit and profit of the rich in the West. Shell robbed Nigeria oil and polluted the Niger Delta, so crops do not grow. The people are starving, and many have left their home. Shell paid the army to rape and kill our people. We need the British government to condemn this killing and call on President Buhari and his corrupt government to go. Enough is enough. And for Britain to stop looting and extracting from Nigeria and other countries. We have to find a new way of organizing ourselves. This protest is a wake-up call for all Africa and for all women. So we have to stand for our right and fight this fight. Buhari must go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Osama. That was really powerful. I'd now like to welcome back Selma. I'm sorry if the instructions didn't quite work, Selma. So I hope, I think we can hear you now. I'm
fine. Can you hear me now?
We can. It's absolutely perfect.
Wonderful. Okay. First of all, thank you. I'm pleased to be with such wonderful people, speaking, each of them, about tremendously important things for all of us, because the world is shrinking in size and we must be aware that the struggle in one place is our struggle, whether that place is ours or not. I'm very glad to have been involved in 1970 in the march against the persecution of Black people in Notting Hill, and especially the Mangrove Restaurant, where they met and planned many things. And then later in the trial organized by the British state to find people who were struggling for their rights, many of them new to this country, and demanding the police accountability to find them guilty of heinous crimes of plotting against the state. And I was the witness of Althea Jones LeQuant, who was the prime organizer of this event, this march, this opposition, in fact, this movement, because that's what it amounted to, along with Dorcas Howe, who, by the way, I was related to by marriage. And they, first of all, they prepared like they were preparing for a war, which indeed they were. They studied a book called Black Jacobins, where the Haitian people overthrew slavery and took power into their own hands. And that history helped them, brought them together, made them understand that not only you can win, but you must win. When I walked into the courtroom in 1971 to testify, I was astonished at how different it was from other courtrooms, because the gallery was full of young Black people who were keen and eager about what was going on. And in every way, Althea, who represented herself, Dorcas also represented himself, but the other 7 people of the Mangrove 9 were represented by other lawyers. I was amazed at how powerful the movement of the people was in that courtroom. I did my testimony and I left, but every day during that court case, there was a picket outside of the courtroom of the population backing the people inside. And every day that the court sat, there was a sheet that was published about what happened that day in court. And when the police constantly harassed the people outside, then the women got together and they had a march against the police outside of the courtroom where they were being persecuted, but not so much persecuted because of the activity of those outside. And it was very successful. The police let them alone. They stopped persecuting them outside the courtroom. All 9 people were found not guilty of these crimes. And it was the first time in British society when in a court of law it was found that the police were racist. It wasn't a discussion, it was a fact, and it was proven. Now, Steve McQueen, who was a young Londoner here at that time, or shortly after, has made a film about it. And I have one line in it. That is, the actress who played me had one. My husband had one line and I had one line. But what was interesting was the speech that he made, this great filmmaker, the speech that he made when the film was shown for the first time at the British Film Institute. He said to the audience of some hundreds, not sitting too close to each other, but it's a very large hall, he said, the things that you all did in the 70s, that's why I have a job as a filmmaker. That's why Black people are getting jobs in theater. in other words, he showed that the activity, the struggle, the organizing that people did carefully, just putting their egos aside and concentrating on the job that needed to be done. That's why we were able to win that trial. And it, interestingly enough, the film comes out just as the Black Lives Matter announces itself. And as soon as it came out, you know, others, you will want to know this, sister, others said, Palestinian lives matter. And Aboriginal people in Australia said, Aboriginal lives matter. And in a way, it was the opening of the international movement for justice, that exploding everywhere, and people identifying with each other in a really important way. Now, I want to make a couple of other points briefly. I won't take too much time.
Take as much time as you want, Thelma. We're running slightly ahead of schedule. So please take as much time as you need. We're running slightly ahead of schedule, so take your time.
Good, that's splendid. There's a bill that's already passed in the Commons and is now going to the Lords that will outlaw BDS. That if you do or say anything, do anything that hurts business interests, that's illegal, and BDS will be one of the things. The other thing is that all kinds of testing of animals and ill treatment, sadistic treatment of animals, if you protest that, and that's difficult for some people to make money, then you are guilty of a crime. If they rape you or even murder you, and they are officers of the law or employed by officers of the law, they are not guilty of a crime. And we are all going to have to concentrate on getting that law thrown out, or we are going to be in real trouble. And also our movement will be undermined. Our movement to save the planet will be undermined, because we will want the end of the oil and the gas and the coal, which is destroying the environment, and that's against the economic interests of the billionaires, and that could be a crime as well. So that our movement to save the planet and to save people and to have some kind of liberation, not some kind, every kind of liberation from every kind of racism and discrimination and every kind of poverty and lack of food that the sister from the All African Women's Group spoke just before I did. All of that, the struggle itself must be protected. And that's what we're going to have to concentrate on as soon. Right now, we have to get it together. I want to say that it's really wonderful to have a meeting like this and to let people talk about the struggles that they're engaged in. We are very involved with Haiti. We of the Global Women's Strike and women of color in the Global Women's Strike, which Margaret is part of, the first person who spoke today. We need each other and must begin to think in terms of how what we do will have an impact on others far, far away. The environment is a classic example of that, although there are thousands of examples. You know, they talk sometimes, the scientists and the money men and women, money women too, they have it now, talk about how this is green and we're going to do green things. And then you find out in the small print that what they say is green turns out to be digging in the global south and polluting other places in the world. We can't have that. We won't have that. We must be accountable to each other. And I think that Black Lives Matter has opened the way for a new kind of a broader perspective than we have had, so that we are involved where we are, but we're also connected and in some ways involved all over the planet. I think I want to say one other thing about history and how vital it is. I mentioned earlier that those who won the Mangrove 9 trial had studied a book about a revolution. I think it's really important. The movement when Black Lives Matter first began, they threw statues down. And every time they did, we began to hear about who those people really were, who have been idealized and idolized and made statues to, and are big murderers and slave dealers. And I've seen on the television much more of what the history is of slavery, what the history is of British imperialism, what the history is of all the imperialisms. And it begins to look like a movement that can overcome, now wait for it, that can overcome the ambition of some people who want to use the movement for their own benefit, to raise themselves and don't give two hoots about the rest of us. That has been a big problem in our movement, and one we must not allow to dominate. We're on a track now. We're beginning to expand. We're beginning to understand our connections. We're beginning to know that we want to change, not something, not a few things, but everything. And together we will have the power to do it. So let us protect our movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Selma. I'm now going to invite all the panelists back on stage. So I'm going to move this to gallery mode so you can see everybody. And I invite the other panelists to please put on their video screens. In terms of how we're going to take the question and answers today, firstly, before I go into question and answers, a virtual round of applause for all the speakers. We weren't able to do one after each one, but I hope you know how much it means to us that you're able to take the time to come and talk to us today and to share your experiences and your thoughts on how we can develop the movement. In terms of the question and answers now, I will be asking for people to use the raise hand function. If you're an attendee, you'll be able to see within your, below your name, a function which says raise hands. So hopefully you can raise your hand if you have a question. I've seen one question's already been dropped into the Q&A, but if others have questions, comments, please feel free to raise your hand now. I'll give you a minute or two to work out your questions and then we can work through them. Sam, I presume everybody's, from the attendees, if you could just confirm you're able to see the raise hand function and everybody is able to participate?
No, I can ask Nina to come and help me. I wonder if she would. Hold on.
No, I don't see it actually. I don't see the raise hand function, but it may be because I'm
You're also a host.
Yeah. People can put it in the chat. I was going to put one in the chat, at least to get things going.
Brilliant. I have the first question coming up, and this is from Nikki. Nikki, I'm going to promote you to panelist. So you should be able to speak now. And then if you'd like, you can switch your camera on and ask your question, please. Over to you, Nikki.
Hello, hi. Sorry, not very good lighting here. Selma mentioned a bill, and I assume it's the Spy Cops bill, but I just wanted to check because she said that it was a bill that was going to actually affect our right to protest, not only the issue of police having the power to commit any crime with impunity with the justification that they were acting on behalf of the state. But I just wondered if she could just explain what she meant about how it was going to affect our right to protest against, BDS and the other issue and for the environment.
Shall I answer now?
Yes, please.
It means the bill would allow the government to pounce on any of us whose campaigns mean that the economic interests as they define it are being hurt, so that if boycott, divestment, and sanctions in support of the liberation movement of Palestinians will begin to hurt those banks and those corporations and those arms traders who are persecuting the Palestinians and whom we want to stop. And we would, in that case, be the criminals because we would be undermining an economic enterprise. The same thing is true with whether if they murder us or rape us or in other ways harm us, and they are either acting a part of the state or acting on behalf of the state, they would not be criminalized. They would be able to get away with that crime. As a matter of fact, it would not be a crime. Now, I want to say one thing about that, especially relating to the sister who spoke from the North, and that is that they have already decriminalized rape in the sense that very few men who are rapists are brought to trial and even fewer are found guilty because of the way the state has been dealing with rape and persecuting and even accusing women of lying and putting women in prison because they report rape and the state decides, the police decide that it's not true. So, and I think that was part of the preparation for this bill that they are now trying to get through Parliament, where you are not able to defend yourself against the state, clearly and plainly against us. I want to say one other thing, if I may, about what the state. We have to be really looking hard at what's happening around us in relation to state power, in relation to those who govern us and say they are democratic, despite this law, which is very anti-democratic. They don't want to feed those children that this man, this footballer has asked that they feed and who has himself been feeding them. And they haven't wanted to protect us from the virus either. There isn't any time to discuss that. But they have, Black Lives Matter implies, that all lives matter, including Black lives. Finally, the Black lives will matter too. But to them, none of our lives matter, and we must be aware of that, and it must be an important part of the framework of how we lead our lives and how we organize our struggle.
Thank you, Selma. I noticed that Huda would like to make an additional comment on that before I go to the next two questions from the audience. Huda, would you like to unmute yourself and speak?
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I think the Spy Cops bill is terrifying, and another example, like Salma said, of the state abusing its power against protesters. An example, not necessarily directly relevant to the bill, but just the state abusing its power with Palestine Action. We've seen them try and use many tactics to try and repress activists and suppressors and stoppers from protesting against Elbit Systems, including after our 3-day rooftop occupation of one of their factories, where windows were smashed and we poured red paint down the front of the building. We were released after custody after 40 hours and put on stringent bail conditions, which meant a curfew, etc., and other things. But the worst of all was the fact that we were not allowed to go outside any Elbit sites or associated companies in the UK. And when it came just last week to our plea hearing, where we argued, and I argued personally about my right to protest, because we also organised several demos, etc., and our right to engage in protest, the judge actually said, to serve the interest and protect the interest of the business, that they wouldn't grant us that right to go to any site associated with Elbit Systems. And now we're seeing, for the most minor of things, people getting arrested and the same conditions being placed. And it's terrifying to see how the UK government has not only allowed for these companies to operate, but they prioritise again and again profits, property, businesses being able to profit from the oppression of people. They're not looking at the war crimes that they're complicit in, or investigating them for that. They're not looking at the fact that they're marketing their weapons as battle tested. They actually recently got a contract, the UK police, with Elbit Systems for drone surveillance across the UK. So this is for ordinary citizens, for protests, again, and they're using the same concept that they use in Palestine and occupied territories, that they're using in the US-Mexico wall for the surveillance towers. They're now using as well to surveil migrants and refugees coming into this country. And these are the companies that they're protecting from the citizens of the UK from being able to engage in their right to protest. And this bill is just another terrifying example of them trying to abuse their state power, to suppress voices and to suppress the truth. But I think this is even more of a call for people to rise up, to take a stand, and to not allow them to silence us, to not allow them to scare us off from engaging in our right to protest, from taking action, and to go out and do exactly what we need to do, which is to stop these businesses from being able to operate and profit from the oppression of people, to stop our institutions from investing in these companies, and to take direct action to stop that, and to not let them scare us off with their bills and their tactics to suppress us. So I think, yeah, that's my contribution.
Thank you, Huda. I have 4 questions, and I'm just going to take them in the order I've written them down. I don't know who was first. I have Naomi. Naomi, are you happy for me to promote you to panelists to allow you to speak? I'm just going to move you over so you can ask your question out aloud. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry, this is... Naomi, you should now be on. And would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Sorry, it's just taking me a second to be re-put in the meeting. Just give me, and I've lost my question as a result, which I will pull up. I think I might have to summarize it. I've just scroll and see if I can get my wording that I figured out. So my question was about political education. I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers for speaking so eloquently and passionately, but also for demonstrating collectively the importance of solidarity, intersectional solidarity between various liberation struggles. And I wanted to ask, at a time when governments in the UK, the US, and this week in France, also to name just a few, when these governments are mounting a massive attack on education, specifically on teaching about systemic racism, really don't think they know what critical race theory is, but hey, about the criticism of Israel, or critiques in France of laïcité, or secularity in France, a free discussion of complex issues around terrorism there. Also on the education provided through unions, a critical source of education for many workers. So in the context of these attacks, how do you think that liberation struggles and activists can come together to fight for and to continue the crucial work of popular political education? And sorry, thank you, that was way longer than I thought it was when I typed. But, thank you for indulging me.
Thanks for your question, Naomi. I wondered if, Margaret, would you like to start with some thoughts on that? And for the other speakers, attendees who are on here, just to let you know, I've promoted you to panelist if I've seen that you have a question. But perhaps, Selma, would you like to start and then maybe move to Margaret? If I can't make out if I can hear from Margaret yet. And Luke, we've got you on the panel, but we will ask your question in a second. So
I've unmuted myself. I'll be happy to go after Selma.
Perfect.
Selma's on
Selma,
mute.
I'm going to ask you to unmute again, if that's okay. I don't know if... not yet unmuted. But...
Why doesn't Margaret go ahead in the meantime?
Yeah? Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because there's a huge struggle going on in the US exactly, on these questions. And you may have heard that there's been a tremendous attack on what is called ethnic studies programs in schools, not only in universities, but also in high schools and even earlier in Arizona, Texas, and in other places. And indeed, some of the textbooks in Texas and some other states are being changed now. So even the language around slavery and the slave trade are being changed and called another name, the triangular trade. There's been a big flap over a series that was done by the New York Times called 1619, where they made basically the case that a lot of the so-named founding fathers and the Revolutionary War, a lot of that had to do with maintaining slavery. And we know a lot of the so-named founding fathers were slave traders. This has been very much under attack by the Trump administration. And in fact, he has set up a special commission. I don't have the name of it in front of me right now, but it's something, something like patriotic education or some such, where they are claiming that teachers have been indoctrinating students with this kind of left-wing thought, and even attacked Howard Zinn, a very quite famous and beloved historian here in the US who wrote a people's history in the United States, and who was trained, by the way, in the Black movement in the South with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So there is a big attack happening on that right now. And in California and in other places, there have been moves. In fact, there was a piece of legislation to try to mandate that the education given in the Cal State universities in California not only be Eurocentric, but that they also include, history and studies of people of color. That was put forward by a Black woman legislator, and the governor of California, who is a liberal, progressive, refused to sign that legislation. So that, that battle is really continuing. And also, I would like to say that one of the movements happening now in the United States alongside the Black Lives Matter movement is the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And what is unique in a way about the Poor People's Campaign is they use a fusion approach. They have what they call pillars of evil that include racism, poverty, the war economy, the environmental devastation, and what they call shifting the moral narrative. And what they're refusing to do is to divide any of these issues. It is a cross movement and multiracial movement. And every time they're pressed to say, but you can't really, why don't you just focus on racism? Or why don't you just focus on poverty or the environment? And the Poor People's Campaign, and I'll have to say, part of it, the Global Women's Strike in the US and women of color in the Global Women's Strike, we are national partners to the Poor People's Campaign, and I'm on the coordinating committee in California. So I just wanted to, to highlight that, because you asked about an approach, in terms of how do these movements come together? How do we cross these divides, given the attack that's happening, and a kind of a dumbing down of people, almost the flipping of things, like what is this administration and supporters call fake news, right? When they're the ones putting out fake news. So there's a whole attack and a lot of misinformation and conspiracy theories and a lot of crap, really, floating across the US. So that's part of what we're up against. And teachers are very, very much under attack, especially now with COVID. They're being asked to take their lives on the line and reopen the schools, while at the same time the administration are not providing the resources that are needed that schools could reopen safely. And in fact, some teachers have died after they went back to school with the reopening of schools. So there's more that I could say about that, but Selma may want to weigh in a bit more. But I was also glad to be able to raise up the Poor People's Campaign. That is also, by the way, connected to the piece on popular and liberation education, because connected to the Poor People's Campaign, there's something called the University of the Poor. And there are all kinds of webinars and trainings and classes, et cetera, going on, really looking at specific struggles, but also at particular methods of organizing, right? And what fits with that kind of movement, cross movement fusion approach of organizing. And just also to say quickly that those of us in the strike, the Global Women's Strike, we were very drawn to that approach, because we have also been a fusion movement out of the gate, because we have always organized as one body. We are the Global Women's Strike, but we have also recognized the autonomy of women of color, of sex workers, LGBTQ with queer strike, disability, etc. So we come from it in a slightly different way than the Poor People's Campaign, but indeed it also is a fusion approach. And we very much believe that kind of fusion approach and the international work that Selma talked about, from Haiti to Palestine, we need all of this, because we're not going to be able to just win in the classroom or anywhere else if we're not making those kinds of connections.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Selma?
Yes, I agree entirely with what Margaret has said. There are just two things that I would add briefly. One is that being in the movement is an education. And I feel I never went to university. I thought it would ruin my mind. I think I was right. But I got an education in the movement about the way human beings can come together, and the uniqueness of every individual and their unique contribution to the struggle that I feel I have a degree. I have a few degrees. The second thing that I wanted to say is, when you are fighting for yourself and you are fighting alongside others, there is a humanity and a real joy in working together that is itself an education, because it tells you that what they have said about all the others that we're stupid, that we don't know better, that we can't be trusted and all the rest. All of that is untrue. All of that is to keep us divided and for us to have a low opinion, not only of others, but of ourselves. And the movement gives us pride and confidence and also the ability to make our way to other people. Can I say one other thing? We are poor. And that is really a terrible waste of resources and of possibilities in our lives. And we in the strike have come to what we call a care income because we are carers as women and because we want the whole society to be caring. And because the planet needs caring and the natural world needs caring, we thought that we should get an income for that work and transform our relationships and transform what the society is organized to accomplish. That is, to enhance the natural world and to enhance and be accountable to each other. And one thing the Poor People's Campaign has done is to endorse the care income, and they see that as a way of dealing with poverty finally, once and for all, and for dealing with the environment and for dealing with racism and for dealing with militarism. That is, you're dealing with all of the evils because you are concentrating not on conquest, not on exploitation, but on the end of it, on the creation and protection of all life.
Thank you, Selma. Our next question is from Luke. Thanks. Cheers, Naomi. Luke, I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask your question. Thank you. Hopefully you should be able to speak now.
Unmute. Yes. I'll try and remember it. I was just thinking about, I think Nigeria is the former Prime Minister are they better? Are they any worse than each other? Are they worse? Are they pretty much worse, as bad as each other?
Yeah, I saw your question in the chat, Luke. It was Goodluck Jonathan any better than the current president, was your question.
Yes.
If I may,
yes.
I'm going to take your question and then Lukman's question. So I'm going to take two questions at a time and then ask the panelists if they'd like to offer a response. Lukman, I'm going to unmute you now. Hopefully you can unmute yourself now that I've offered. Yes, please go ahead and ask the question.
Hello, this is partly a question, partly a request, really. I'm part of Camden Momentum, and I'm asking people who are actually Momentum members and are Bain, as in black minorities, if they would like to join Bain Momentum, which is a group that exists. And the reason I'd like more people to join from Bain is that there's going to be a push to get Momentum to actually run a campaign which will last a long time about raising awareness, political awareness, of actually doing proper political opposition to the things that have been talked about, the banning of teaching of racism in the schools, the spy cop bill, and a whole load of other stuff. The problem is that at the moment, the way the Labour Party is, there is absolutely no opposition at all to these things. And
That's
that was
right.
proved by the Labour Party actually abstaining on the spy cop bill the other day. They have said nothing on the banning of racism. And one of the things that us activists, the BAME activists on Momentum are saying is that it's been long enough now since the election of Momentum, and it's about the time that we moved on this, the whole thing. So what we would like to do is get the group to be bigger. So I'm asking people who are actually BAME members of Momentum if they would like to join. I put my phone number. I'm just an ordinary activist on that group. I'll put my phone number on the chat. And if anybody wants to actually contact me, because at the moment the group exists mainly on WhatsApp. So obviously it's difficult for people to get to know about it. So if they contact me, then I will actually try to get some of the administrators to put these people on. Thank you.
Thank you. And since that wasn't a question, if I may, I will take one, although it was a useful contribution, and I'm sure many of the people who are attending today will be in touch with Lukman. Sarah Calloway, could I ask you to, I'm going to try and unmute you, Sarah, and hopefully you'll be able to ask your question, and then in the next round of questions, I will take Giorgio. Sarah, over to you. We can't hear you yet, Sarah. Maybe you've got some headphones plugged in or something. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. If Sarah, while you sort out your microphone, I'm going to try and get Giorgio to ask his question. Giorgio, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and if you wouldn't mind asking your question, please. There he is. Excellent. Giorgio, hopefully you should be able to unmute now if you just accept the request to unmute.
Okay.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. If you just speak a little bit louder.
Okay. For what Margaret was saying, poverty is important, crucial in the States, but it's crucial here as well. And I was asking if to all the panels, what relevance is the demand for money directly, because that's what came out in a riot in Naples on Friday. There was a slogan saying, if you close us, pay us. So I like for people to say something about this, because I think the question of money is very relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. And since Sarah, I don't know if your unmuting is working now. Can you try again? Oh, I'm afraid it's not working. If you want to post your question in the chat, I will ask it aloud for you. So would any of the speakers like to start with answering that question? Maybe Sheridan or Asma or Margaret? I think it's specifically about incomes. Sorry, you can hear my children in the background. Beg your pardon. Margaret?
Okay.
Oops.
Giorgio, I mean, it's not only the United States. Poverty is a crucial question everywhere. And what has happened in the US is that there was very little discussion actually on a national level in the media among the political class about poverty. The Poor People's Campaign in the last 3 years since it kicked off again, by the way, the Poor People's Campaign was first begun by Martin Luther King some months before he was assassinated, right? So this Poor People's Campaign is basically taking that up. But you do find that the conversation where they talk about shifting the moral narrative, we are finding more conversations now about income inequality, that then the Poor People's Campaign organized a candidates forum. All of the Democratic candidates, including Joe Biden, turned up and actually said he wanted to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign. So it's you know, it's having some impact. Clearly, there's a lot more to go, but the issue of poverty is something that is a worldwide issue. And if you look at Haiti, for example, which is the most impoverished place in the Americas, and you look at the continent of Africa, which is so rich in the resources of people, but also wealth under the ground. But nevertheless, you see the level of suffering and poverty of the people on the continent. You really understand that there has to be a global movement on poverty. And for us in our corner of the movement, in the work we're doing in the strike and women of color, the global women's strike, since COVID, there's been a lot of conversations about caregiving. I see you, our chair there, you have your children in the background, you're multitasking, and increasingly with children being out of school, you know, you find a lot of that going on. And we make the case that caregivers, mothers and unpaid caregivers, we too are essential workers. We're right there on the front line. So you have from the Melinda Gates Foundation to all kinds of mainstream feminism talking about caregiving. But as Giorgio was right to underscore poverty, because they are not talking about money for it. They're talking about ways to share it, ways to get rid of it, talking about the children as though just get rid of the children so the mothers could go out and do the real thing, all right, and not valuing the relationship between mothers and their primary caregivers. So we are very, and all kinds of academics that are writing books and having discussions and webinars on a caring economy and caregiving, but not one of them, actually, with the exception of those of us in our network who were very glad when the Poor People's Campaign took it up, are saying, we want money for that work. We have earned it, and we're sick of being ripped off, and we're tired of organized labor, the progressive movements, and a lot of movements really focusing on, quote unquote, the point of production, which is like when you go out of the home to work, and to sideline those welfare mothers that made that great movement in the United States for money for mothers. So that's an important question. So when the issue of caregiving and caregivers comes up, we take it in the direction. We worked in the UN to get it measured in value. That's all well and good for time use surveys to be done. But now is the time to collect, actually. And one other quick thing I should say, you know, when we were doing that work in the UN to get that UN resolution through, that's quite a story. It was historic in a lot of ways. And you know, grassroots people like us don't get the credit we should for it. But the issue of, we addressed the issue of the Global South. We worked to try to get it implemented. I think Trinidad was one of the first places that tried to move on that and get that implemented. And we have to thank the Clotilde Walcott and the National Union of Domestic Employees, you know, for laying the groundwork of that. But we're not going to let them get away with it, because if you look at the figures by that conservative group, and I'll put conservative in quotes from Oxfam, and you see the trillions of dollars that are produced per year in unpaid labor alone around the globe, you can see that we're being ripped off, that this is money that the British government, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Macron in France and all of them, they've got these budgets that can go around bombing and invading and occupying places. Well, guess what? Those resources belong to us. And in the course of it, they're also destroying the environment, by the way, because they're crazy enough to be so greedy that, you know, they're going for the money as opposed to protecting the environment. So Giorgio, it's a reason it's called the Poor People's Campaign, and a reason that poverty is so central in it. But at the same time, Giorgio, the refusal to separate poverty off from racism, from environmental degradation, and from the war economy, the distorted moral, that is also a piece of the whole. And I'm also on the national board of the National Welfare Rights Union in the US. And we're planning now, in fact, I'm kind of missing a planning meeting right now, of a truth commission where we are saying Poverty is violence. Poverty and all of its interlocking impacts is violence. And we're speaking out about it, and we're taking it to the UN. The first one will be on the international, December 10th, which is the International Human Rights, Declaration of Human Rights or whatever at the UN. So we're taking it to the Rapporteur on Poverty and UN Rapporteur on Poverty, and really putting poverty in the place that it should be, which is violence. It destroys people. It is a killer, and we have to end it. It has got to stop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Margaret. Selma, did you want to comment?
Well, women are the poorest sex, and we're also the ones who are responsible for the whole human race. We reproduce the whole human race. And it's when I was a young mother, I wondered, how is it possible? I didn't understand really. How is it possible that all the mothers that I know are working so hard and bringing new life into the world and giving these young life a view of how the world is? What is it they're learning about the world they've entered? And we are without any social power, that is the kind of power that you have from money. I think that it's really important that this work of reproducing the human race, it has the backing of the society, not merely the toleration, but the fact that the society acknowledges what this work is and wants to contribute to it, women and men, in the same way as I think we want to contribute to the development and protection of the natural world. And the wealth of the society must back it. That's what money is for. Otherwise, what Nyerere, the great president of Tanzania, and he was a great man, he said the reason that there are rich people is to make poor people. Now, he's got a point. And I think it's a point that we should take very seriously about what the direction of society is and what the wealth of society is to accomplish is the well-being of those of us within it, of all life within it. And I think that everywhere people are striving for that clarity and for that cash. And I think that's a women's movement of enormous proportions, which I think men will find very enticing.
Thanks, Selma. Unless another panelist wants to contribute, I'm going to slightly abuse the privilege of chair to ask a question. And I mean, I've been listening to what all the speakers have said. I can see a number of you do a lot of work on the ground, but as somebody who's working within the trade union movement and who's campaigning for the release of Julian Assange, as the state clamps down on whistleblowing, on journalism and any form of dissent, what I find tricky, and I was hoping that Huda would be here, but she's not here to answer it because she had to leave because of other caring commitments. What I find tricky is turning it into reality, because we all know the rationale for this. We all know that it's not okay for people to be poor. We know it's not okay for children to be hungry. We all know that it's not okay for the police to clamp down on us. But while we are in a position where we are weaker, so to speak, and we do not occupy positions of power and control, what can we do to take over positions of power and control in order to achieve the objectives that we want? Because at the moment, my worry is that we're not anywhere near the positions of power. We are just fodder for whoever wants to beat us up next. And I'd be grateful for the panel's thoughts on that.
You know, could I say something?
Please.
I feel that it's not those in positions of power who are making change, but it's those of us who have no positions or little positions of power who must respect the struggles we are already involved in and build them, and hope that some who are in positions of power will be won over. But the point, our problem is not that we don't have power, because, you know, we get into positions of power and they corrupt us, and we forget where we came from, and we adopt the positions of the people around us. There are exceptions to that. We know about that. I just quoted the president of a state who said that the reason there are rich people are to make poor people. Not too many people have those positions of power, but what we must concentrate on is to strengthen and broaden the struggles that many, many of us are involved in. I'm really interested to see again the woman from the north who's fighting for women to keep their children and for the state not to take them, and how that movement, I've seen that movement grow in the last few years, and all kinds of women coming together, and some men supporting what the women are doing. I think we are not quick enough or respectful enough of each other sometimes to appreciate what wonderful work is going on, which they don't advertise, you know. They don't say, you've done a wonderful job here, you made rape and marriage illegal. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And that you had a revolution and you overthrew slavery. The man has just written a book to prove that the leader was the one who made the revolution. I never heard a leader make a revolution. You know, you need a lot of people to make a revolution. But, you know, our work, you know, the Poor People's Campaign is a lesson in point. They start from the bottom and move up. And the people in charge of that movement who are keeping it together, the leadership, are not trying to go higher. They're trying to get all of us to go higher together. And I think, you know, there are ways of doing that, and we can discuss it. And maybe we can have a webinar on how to organize to strengthen the movement rather than for an individual to go up and be isolated there and undermined and often defeated or corrupted.
Thank you, Salma. Margaret, I noticed you were about to speak. Would you like to go next? And then we're almost at 9 o'clock and we've come to the end of this webinar. So I'd like to take any other final comments from speakers after that. Margaret, over to you.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Salma is saying. And let me just say this, there are some young people who are children of some of our members of the strike in Philadelphia who are not going to vote, right? And I spoke to some students in Southern California recently, some of whom were, you know, militant and revolutionary, and too militant and revolutionary to vote, right? And there is, of course, that distrust of the political class. and thinking, well, it's not really going to make any difference if we vote for Trump or we vote for Biden. And it's like, are you bloody well kidding me? You know, so I think that it's been difficult for people who want to change the world. And when they say they want to change the world, I have to believe it, to be able to hold what seems to be two conflicting thoughts or actions in their head, that voting does not make you any less of a revolutionary or any less of a person who wants to change the world. And we also know that there are some elected officials who are working on the inside, something a number of us would never do. But we also have to be in a position where we kind of select our enemies, so to speak, if you want to put it that way. And for example, on the issue of Haiti, you know, there is an elected official, a member of Congress in particular, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, that has been spot on in relation to Haiti. If we need something from her, that they're threatening to assassinate President Aristide, or the United States is playing the fool or whatever, and we contact her, and she will work with us now, who are, you know, to intervene in a way that's useful for the movement. So I think it's really a mistake to have the idea that you just kind of, you know, like the young people in Philly have this thing of like, well, they're all no good, and what's the point of voting anyway? I think that we cannot afford that luxury. We have to be able to do all of it, but we also do it in a way that when we vote, it doesn't mean that that number one, we're fooled, that the person we're voting for is some kind of civil rights or movement leader. No, you know, the Poor People's Campaign does not give a platform to elected officials. We can have a congressional briefing or whatever, we invite them to listen, or invited them to come and speak about, answer the questions of impoverished people on the issues of poverty, but they're not allowed to serve in any coordinating committee or get up on a PPC platform and speak. The people whose voices are lifted up are the people who are most impacted. I think that's what Selma was talking about starting from the bottom up. So if you're going to walk and chew gum at the same time, you have to remember who you're holding on to, who you're going with. It's not abandoning the bottom and then moving up to the top. You know, it's very annoying when you have this thing about, if only we had 50% of women in elected government and all of this, the world would be such a better place. You know, just think of Margaret Thatcher, the Palestinian sister. I was so glad to hear her. Just think of Golda Meir. You know what I mean? And we could go on and on and on. Some people even put Hillary Clinton on that list, whatever, right? So I think that we have to not afford the luxury of thinking that we could just sit this one out and then, you know, we feel good about ourselves and we're clean and we can move forward. So the bottom line is, Deepa, that even if you get into the position of power, you're not going to get anywhere without the movement on the street from the bottom. It's not going to happen. It is impossible. And and what happens is, if that movement on the street isn't happening, you end up in a case where you're being corrupted, right? And because what else do you have going for you? You're just up there surrounded by enemies, all kinds of money flying hands, all kinds of corruption.
Yes.
And you're isolated, as Salma said. So we have a responsibility to continue to push them, to continue to inform them and call them out when they're screwing us over, but not to take the position of either or. We either get into the halls of power or we remain in the movement. There's some of us who never want to be in the halls of power, me being one of them, and remaining in the movement. But sure as hell, I was in there in the UN, lobbying at the UN and calling Maxine Waters when we need to her, or going to the Congressional Black Caucus. We've got to work all of it. It's like doing housework. You ever know anybody, Deepa, your children are there, who can afford to do one thing at a time? We can't. We would never make it. We would not survive. But nevertheless, when it comes to our political work or our movement work, we think of it that way. One other point I do want to make is that there are a lot of people running around calling themselves doing movement work and treating it like it's a hobby. You know, not like your life depends on it, not like your grandmother's life depends on it, not like your children's life depends on it, but this is something I could do when I feel like it. And, you know, and people should be grateful that I'm giving them a little 5 or 10 minutes or even an hour or a day. And I think that that in itself is a corruption in the movement, along with the NGOization of the movement, where you have these NGOs running around who maybe began with a good idea, began at grassroots, and then got in a position where their focus becomes writing their grants or getting the next money, as opposed to building the movement. So, yeah, thanks for that question, Deepa, and for your intervention on that also, Selma. And I see Asma is smiling away, and yeah. So thank all of you.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'll take 20-second closing comments from Sheridan and if they would like to, because I know we're well past the time and I know people have other commitments after 9 o'clock. I'm so grateful that so many of you have stayed on the call, and recognizing that many of you have children and other caring commitments to look after. We will try and end in the next minute so you don't miss anything. Sheridan, over to you.
Yeah, sure. It was just basically just to go back to the poverty. I didn't quite catch the question, but now I get the gist of what the guy was saying. I actually regularly volunteer at the Hounslow Food Box 3 days a week. Now the food box has been going on for the last 20 years, and we're actually just running out of donations. But the fact is when you actually enter into the food box and you see the amount of calls that we get from the social worker, from people's GP saying that people, you know, their clients or their patients got no food in their fridge. Some of them are refugees as well. They're just living in a room. They don't have cooking appliances, things like that. You actually realize that, yes, this is a first world country, but poverty does exist and it's real. I mean, we're sending like 190 deliveries to 190 people per week, which is just insane. You know, and some people even just walking off the street because they realize, oh, there's a food box and obviously there's food in there, and they're just walking in and just asking for anything. And it's just so sad. I mean, in Brentford, we've got 33 pubs. Half of those pubs are now giving food for free for kids because obviously the government are refusing to give them free meals. Yeah, and it's so sad. It's things just even like sandwiches and fruits and things like that. So it's just basically, I just wanted to mention that about the poverty. You know, obviously it is real, it does exist, and unfortunately it's getting worse because even in the food bank we are actually running out of donations as well. So yeah.
And if you post your food bank details in the chat to all panelists and attendees, hopefully we can all, I know there's a Euston food bank that Camden Momentum supports, and Streets Kitchen, which our Camden Momentum volunteers, man. So we'd be very happy to share those. Asma, final thoughts?
Yeah, I was just taken awed by Margaret and Selma and everyone else speaking, and I've had my little boy running around me. I have a little boy who's 4 years old. One of the reasons why I fled, and I'm working, doing this grassroots organization that I do for the future of our children. And I just think what we need to do is, for anyone that's of a different, of color, we need to give them time. Shouldn't just like fob them off or stop listening to them, or give them time, listen to them time and time again, have patience, because you'll be surprised how you can learn something from them and you can help them. And we all need to stand together. And I've had lots of challenges myself doing what I'm doing as Soul Sisters, and it's been a year, and I've had obstacles from the local council, from the local residents, from doing what I'm doing, because I'm Bangladeshi British female, and someone like me to speak up about domestic abuse, sexual abuse is like, why am I doing that? And I just want to say that speaking with your voice and listening with your ears, we can do a lot. Honestly, we really can do a lot if we speak with each other, and we can learn from each other a lot as well. And we just need to keep doing what we're doing. But really, to be honest with you, I'm just awed by Selma and Margaret. Thank you very much.
And we're in awe of you. You're
Thank
just
you very
doing
much.
amazing work there, young lady.
Well, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'd like to thank some of the people who were behind the scenes. Sam Weinstein, in particular, who organizes a lot of these events for us as our secretary. I'd like to thank the steering committee of Camden Momentum and our members for hosting this. And thank you to all the panelists. It's nice to see so many wonderful, courageous women and to learn from you. So thanks everybody for joining, and see you all. Just so everybody knows, the Jonathan Cook event has now been posted out to everybody. So everybody, if you haven't attended the last event, you will be able to view the recording, and the same with this event. And thanks everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Power to the people.
Power to
And
the
free
people.
the land.
Bye.